All right, Natalie, can you hear us? There is a bit of a delay whenever the audio is up, so it's about 30 seconds. Yeah. See if she hears us.
Is next week the last week of class?
I believe so, yeah, and then finals, because we do our finals extended hours Sunday and Monday.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Well, everybody's different. It's hard because all the UWs are on totally different schedules.
That is also very mysterious.
Yeah. Okay, just go check and see.
Mhm.
Third. Okay, so our voices are coming through, but that box with you in it is not showing up on the YouTube live screen.
Well, I mean, you don't need the box if you don't want. I mean, is it? Guess it depends on what you want up there.
Yeah, are you sharing your full screen or just your
I'm sharing.
screen?
Choose desktop.
Mhm.
Watch presenter view.
I think presenter view might be the culprit.
Okay. So what view should I use?
I think presenter view is the correct view, but I'm not sure why it's not showing it this time. What we're capturing right now is.
I don't want that
No,
at all.
no.
We definitely don't want that.
When it's up like that, are you able to go up here and in the view? Yeah, that one, because it's, you know, that's your regular screen, isn't it? Regular camera.
That's probably, and
You click that one.
that one.
Mhm. So this is
That's my regular me.
okay, so we just want that.
I think I pinned that.
Okay. And then guess get out of the.
I did this, but maybe that's the problem.
Okay, so no, let me check the YouTube.
Okay. I feel like it's been a long time. I feel like I haven't seen you in a long time.
I know. We haven't seen each other in a long time. How are you got the black and white memo?
I know, I'm just thinking that.
That's a beautiful necklace.
It's from Cambodia. They're little
Oh,
seeds.
I love that.
I mean, at least we're wearing matching shoes. Wish we could have been.
at the fun print dress memo.
Yeah, it's so weird.
We did it. We nailed it, guys.
Huh?
Yeah.
And they're wrap, no, yours isn't a wrap dress.
No, I'm
No.
not, my body's not suited
And
to
mine's
wrap
only,
dresses.
mine's only a fake one.
Mine's a big one too.
Real ones don't work for me either.
I can't be trusted to tie one of those
No,
things.
my parts aren't in the right.
Yeah,
places
same,
for them.
that's my problem as well.
I tried on one from Diane von Furstenberg because I thought
Oh,
she
yes.
was gonna work for it. She makes them for tiny little waspy people.
Yeah.
And this is like up here.
And then I'm too short waisted through here, so it's like.
Do you understand how short
In the darkness of the light.
Yeah, I'm trying to just like see who are in the last one.
Just more.
Sunday morning.
The breeze.
Of course, this happened. It used to be. People would have, yeah, they would have. Yeah, that's all coffee. It's true. Oh, no, it's not good. So yeah, translate themselves. Alan cakes. Classes. I accidentally used to dad's logo as the scope maker. And I didn't know dad. Great. Sounds good. Sorry, get off.
High praise, Madam Shalom. Okay.
Here, people. It's fun. We're good eaters. It's amazing. Things.
Baltimore.
Yeah. I'm not counting down minutes.
No, I I'm saying side by side. Want to welcome everybody to our talk today. Thank you for joining us. This is the second in our Place Literacy series. This one is called Urban Spaces and Third Places, Experiencing and Making the City with Dr. Jennifer Webb. Before we would begin, I would like to read a land acknowledgement statement. In honor of the Anishinaabe people, who's the original peoples and caretakers of this land, we would like to recognize that the University of Wisconsin-Superior inhabits the land of the Ojibwa people. Please take this moment to honor and celebrate ancestral Ojibwa land and the sacred lands of all Indigenous peoples. Our knowledge of and connection to the places in which we exist and frequent are known to us in ways that shape our understanding of our environment and ourselves. This series explores the connection as a type of literacy, one that enables us to interact with our surroundings. In this Selma Swanstrom Geography Fund funded lecture, Jennifer Webb will explore the history of our places and the makings of our neighborhoods. Please welcome Dr. Webb.
Thank you so much for being here today. It's always nice to be around and in community. I have to remember where the camera is, so I'll just move around a little bit. It's such an honor to have been invited and to be here with you and those of you who might be online and streaming. I wanted to start actually with an urban landscape. This is an image of Chicago, because I know that the first in this series was also about water. And one of the things that I think really connects me in my Duluth neighborhood to Superior is that river that is part of both of our landscapes. And so some of what I'm going to talk about here is really kind of informed by the spirit of those landscapes and the waterways that join us together. I also feel as if my neighborhoods in West Duluth are more connected to the Superior landscape because of the nature of the housing, the way it was built around industry that sets it apart from where I spend a lot of my time on UMD's campus, where that landscape seems most connected to the lake. So I'm happy to have the water connecting us between Duluth and Superior. And that's part of the spirit of what I'm going to be doing today. So I'm going to be talking about 3 different pieces, and I'm going to welcome your participation, because one of the things about talking about third spaces is that we're in community together, and we're building those communities that have been tied to community well-being and relationship and all those things that we know are so important to our basic humanity together. So I'm going to start by having us imagine some of our favorite spaces and to talk about some of the principles about about placemaking. And then I'm going to talk briefly about third places and then sort of talk about our neighborhoods. And when I say our neighborhoods, I'm talking about that Superior and Duluth connection. So I'm particularly happy to have come over the High Bridge today to come here, which I actually never use. I'm really a bridge kind of girl. So I was thinking about connections and bridges and the futures that we have together as we rebuild that really critical connection. So the spirit of that is that I'm going to focus on our togetherness in the nature of our similarities on either side of the St. Louis River. And I also want to acknowledge that I'm really going to be focusing on this area after the arrival of the first European settlers. So that I appreciate the land acknowledgement. I was going to include it myself because, of course, these places had deep histories that are extremely important before that moment. And there are so many experts and so many voices. This talk could have been quite different and would need absolutely an expert that I am not on those places and those voices. So one of the things also is that I'm in a library here and we're talking about ways of studying cities and ways of studying places. And so the first thing that I invite my students to do whenever they go to a new city or even when they revisit their own cities is just to be in that place and maybe to take some time and walk. Walking is particularly an excellent tool about place literacies because it slows us down and makes us observe some of the things that otherwise might slip by for moving at greater speed. I also invite people to think about how we are in place with all of our senses. We think first about what we see, but when we are in spaces, actually it's the other senses that are sometimes the ones that are feeding the most information to us. So when I ask you to imagine yourself in one of your favorite places, I'm going to ask you to try and sort of take your sight memory offline and zone in on some of those other senses because they can tell us a lot about places and spaces. I also tell people that getting to know an urban landscape requires multiple returns. So not just one day or one season, because every place is different moment to moment, weather condition to weather condition, all of those things. So deep place literacy really requires us to be in place across time and space. The irony here is that the spaces I'm going to tell you about are spaces I visit but don't live in. And that's an interesting contrast too, because we can sometimes see more in the spaces that we're a guest in than in our own spaces because everything becomes so second nature. I also have done research where I've asked for oral histories, so what to share other people's experiences, and I think those are important around third spaces and places as well, because they're about being in community, and all of our experiences are a little bit different. Obviously, primary and secondary source materials, I've used those very heavily in different ways. And I'm going to show you some archival materials from some of the photographs at the end of my talk. And of course, there's so many other ways to do place literacy. And so those are some of the ones that I think are ways to begin this conversation. So I want to ask you first to close your eyes and put yourself in a favorite place. And for this exercise, I was thinking of an outside place. I'm just going to take a moment, let you put yourself in that place. And then perhaps you can think about what you might sometimes hear in that space, in that place. What might you touch? Are you sitting somewhere? Are you standing somewhere? Is there a breeze? What do you smell? Smell is such an interesting urban clue. And then sometimes taste is the hardest one unless you're, snacking on something. So my question for you is, what about it, that place, is the reason that that's the one you wanted to think of? What about it makes it special to you? And what are some of the sensory things that you're thinking of when I ask you those prompts?
Hard not to think about mosquitoes.
Okay. Mosquitoes, and they have sound and also touch things happening. certainly, and those are very place specific, I think. We can all imagine an encounter with some mosquitoes, I sure can.
Well, I'm a walker all the time, so I always, actually, one of the places I like to go walk is in, the South Superior, there's cemeteries. I could walk in Graceland and, Riverside, and then back to this dirt road. And but yeah, it's a space that's open to me, and I usually see a lot of wildlife there in certain times of years, especially.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that's happening to urban planning is also thinking about how places are made by our non-human neighbors. You know, that is something that people are thinking about as well. It's something my students want to think about. They ask me a lot about the non-humans that we share spaces with. Other things that make that special.
If I'm thinking of more urban setting, one place I'd always go to is just a little cafe in downtown Madison, Wisconsin, right on State Street. That's where I went to college, and really what makes it special is the fact that you're just so surrounded by people and you can hear the noise and you can hear everybody talking, but you're alone. And so that's a wonderful feeling. I love that.
Yeah, so surrounded by activity and
Yeah.
community, but just also in your own space.
Yeah.
It's nice. There's comfort there in that community.
I think that I often think about the old town squares when we travel, whether it's Savannah and it's the sense of history of the homes, or even in some of the older communities in the Southwest, where, I don't know, it draws me back to the origins, of that community. And most of the time it's trees, and older homes that.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I do think that, of course, places have very specific histories, but they're also always changing. And I think that gives us hope. So if there's a space that could be an amazing place, we have the agency to do that. And that places, of course, have been made by these layers of history. And I think, especially if you are traveling, you can see kind of those centering squares, particularly older fabrics that were established on the European model, where we have a town center. Looks a little bit different. Any things you're hearing, and in terms of what you were the soundscape in your head?
I think, so for me, being on the deck on the back of my house, and what I like about it is I feel like I can't be seen, even though I have no fences. I'm completely visible to everybody, but because I can't see the traffic at the front of the house, it feels somehow like I get to be invisible. And yet I can see the alley, I can see people walking past with the dogs, and I like that. And I like being able to hear them, but somehow it still feels like I'm in a little bubble. I mean, it is like being a 2-year-old who's like, you can't see me. And you can, if it's summertime, sometimes I have hummingbirds visiting the rain garden. Like there's kind of a rhythm and a pattern to some of the soundscape and some of the breeze that we get in that same direction for most of the year, that I like that. It feels like it's predictable.
So I've heard some lovely things from all of you. So there are places where you want to be in nature, you want to move in nature, even if that means the mosquitoes. There's the desire to be in a space where you're part of a whole, but also on your own, and that the soundscape makes you feel part of that. There are seasonality pieces. There's also some nostalgia for a place that you were really tied to. And these are all really central to the principles of placemaking, is how we can foster those things and how we can allow people to be in community, have some intimacy, and also to have lots of different activities. So most successful places, like a library, have lots of different things you can do in that space, and lots of different reasons to come to that space day and night, because the more people in that space, the more we feel safe together. That sort of shared security amongst strangers or neighbors. And those are all very central to placemaking. So I'm glad that you all brought them up. A place that I really love, this is my blank screen because I didn't want you to look at the river, but now we're skipping past that. This is a place that I love in Italy, and it also illustrates some of those principles. And there's also been some purposeful design. So it's right next to the ocean. They're really thinking about different modes of transportation and how people move through that space and bring eyes to that space, even if they're not going to stay. They have purposefully used the kinds of plants that will survive the very extreme wind and saltwater conditions there. They've also thought about the little humans that really love it there, and thinking about how to scale some of the places for the little humans. They've also realized they're going to need a lot of bike parking. So thinking about how definitely alternate modes of transportation have happened. And what I've seen in the time that they're doing there is they continue to layer traditions on. So people will come and go for a walk, but they also might come for a street festival, for a kiddos festival. So how can formalized programming and informal patterns strengthen our places and our community? And so these are the pieces that I think of when I'm often in place. And I've really not been there through the times of the year, all around the year, so I don't know what it's like on a cold day in January next to the Adriatic. I think it probably rains really, really, really hard, but there are still people moving even when I've been there in summer rainstorms. So I think we're all thinking about how to foster these kinds of spaces that we love. I also should note that nostalgia is an interesting and love of a place that you remember is a very powerful way we can deepen place attachment. So how can we foster a love of place that will make us caretakers of it? The studies about place attachment actually tell us that people learn attachments to place often alongside their mothers when they're really, really little. And sort of the way that, and they specifically say mothers, it's, studies that might adapt now with different parenting practices, but that we learn some of those attachments to community while holding our mother's hand. And so I often think about the way that our families navigate spaces too, and how we're teaching that attachment in wonderful ways. So what makes a great space? If you're interested in learning about being a placemaker, which we all are, the Project for Public Spaces, this is a slide from their site, they tell us sort of the ingredients at a large and small scale. And so I like to think about them out from this concentric space, because some of these things seem really obvious, and some of them, especially when I'm talking about them with my students, are kind of a surprise. One of them is the idea that the place certainly needs to have uses and activities. That seems pretty straightforward. The fancy term we use for that in placemaking is triangulation, that there needs to be at least 10 plus activities happening in a place all the time for it to really be successful. And you can build a great place with lots of things to do, and it can be wonderful for a little while, and then things can change. The community can change, there can be disinvestment. So maintaining places as big a job as beginning to foster them. So uses and activities. One of the key things, of course, is sustainability. And by this, they mean that it's one thing to have a one-off party and another thing to have activities that are going to bring people back. Comfort and image. Is it somewhere you want to go and stay? Does it have a variety of seating? Some really interesting studies have gone into public spaces and where there's a variety of seating. And if you have things bolted to the ground, which you might need to do because someone will perhaps carry it off, people are going to be less comfortable in there because we all want to sit down and like move the chair just so. Maybe we want to pull something over because we've got our lunch. So having flexible options, and if you want to be alone in that space is one thing, or do you want to hang out with a group of people in that space? So how can we make it comfortable? This space that we're in the library has lots of really great examples of this. I've never been to this space, I must say, so I've heard about it, but we have the seating here that says, hey, come and look as a group, or spread yourself out like I did when I got here. Oh, are you looking something a little bit more homey? Come into one of my armchairs that looks like something that has the lighting that suggests home. Sit by the fireplace. These are the things that allow people to make themselves a place. And I really love the family study room. I think we should have one of those at UW. So strong word UWS on that. So how are we comfortable? And how does the way it's laid out invite people in? What's the image that it's projecting? And how does it go with the places around it? Sociability. These I think are pretty straightforward, but we also need stewardship, people to care for those places and take ownership of it. It's amazing how quickly some trash can make people have a different feeling about that place. Be that person who picks up the trash. I picked up a little lollipop on campus yesterday that I had walked by multiple times. And I was like, why didn't you just pick this up and put it in the garbage, which I did. And then access. One of the things that I think is a challenge with successful places is that we plop it into a place where it isn't linked to other things. So that connectivity, how do you get to that place? How is it connected, not just on foot and bike, but also to larger networks? That means that more people are going to come through it. So this is the piece that I think is often the hardest one, but is also one really, really critical to bringing lots of people through those places. So I think that these help then to think about the places that you love and the places that we want to make in our communities. And I am very proud to live in Duluth and Superior at this time because I think we've been doing a lot of good placemaking work. I took some pictures along some of Tower Avenue, the sort of redesign and reimagining of that. I know that Mayor Payne has been doing a lot of work with this. Certainly, we've been doing a lot in Duluth. And if you don't know already, Zeitgeist is having their usual mayor's event at the end of the month. I think it's on the 28th over the lunch hour, and it will be focusing on third spaces specifically. And RT Ryback will be coming up from the cities. And so if you want to be a placemaker, this would be an excellent way to continue this conversation. And then I also just received a grant to bring a placemaker who works around the globe to UMD and to Duluth this time next year, next April. So stay tuned for that. I'm really excited. I only found out about that yesterday. So breaking news here in the room. Yes, I'm excited about that. I think placemaking has a lot of complex intersecting ideas. It is really meant to be a bottom up. It's about us as people. And this quote sort of talks about that idea of putting people and places together. It's collaborative. It's how we shape our wider public realm. This seems ever more pressing every minute of every day. And thinking about shared values. I think often people who might not agree on other things can come together around places that matter to them and communities that matter to them. So it's not about urban design, it's about use, identity, and an ongoing evolution of what we mean together. And this idea shapes some of the ways in which placemaking happens organically. We have I think over the last several decades, seeing a more institutionalized approach to placemaking that is at the core of what city planners are also doing. And this is part of new urbanist principles and is part of a process where community is built into it, but the placemaking is part of those plans. And I think there's some tension and some possibilities there because institutions have often the resources and the finances maybe to move some of those placemaking things forward, but it can be so easy to lose sight of that community piece. We're doing a small area plan work in Spirit Valley right now, and I went to the first community meeting. There's one on Monday. These are really critical, and they take time. I tell my students, city planning is the worst group project because you've got to have a lot of people, and it's going to take 20 years. And along the way, we're going to hope and think we're closer, something's going to happen, and we're just going to have to be really, really patient. That's hard work, but it's such good work. So now I'd like you to think about an interior place where you go to be in community, one that isn't coming to work and isn't your home. These are third places. So what is a beloved third place in your life?
I can make two. Like I like libraries. I actually haven't been in this one before, but Superior Public Library, I go there, but also just in Dovetail Cafe in Duluth. I go there. I just celebrated. I teach at UMD as well, and I celebrated my last class. I was like, went there, had some treats, and did some grading. You know, so
yeah, Dovetail feels like a very important third place.
Yeah.
Because it has lots of people coming and going, and you usually see a friend, someone you know, in your wider circles. What other things come to mind? There are places you go regularly where you have a community.
Thanks, James, if you're going to look out.
Yep,
You think?
I think Jim's definitely. I think this question is harder post-COVID than it was pre-COVID. What we're seeing is that people kind of lost their fabric of their third places, and we can see that having a weighty cost in our community, our connections. And I think that's why fostering third places is so very, very important. I was like, what will I say from my? Yes.
The Duluth Playhouse,
Yeah.
going to the theater.
Yeah, so going to theater, going with people to theater, sort of the patterns of your life, who you go to those places with. Certainly places of faith, depending on what one's spiritual practices are. Many people would think of their churches as third spaces, or their mosques, or so on and so forth, their synagogues. I also thought about my Pilates class, which I've been going to for a long time, and those people, I know great deals about them. I literally see them at no other time, except when we're working on our muscles. But they are part of that community, and I look forward to seeing them, and I miss them when I don't see them. So that's a good example of a third place. Anything else come to mind?
Go to Depot for a class as well,
Yeah.
then too, so it's a beautiful, there's,
Yeah, art classes, kind of. I bet you've got a lot of them. You're gonna think of them as you're driving home or walking home. Oh, that's what I should have said. One of my third places is the bus. And I'm a regular bus rider, and I ride the bus because I love a schedule. I've been riding the same bus, except this week because I've been getting to work much earlier because it just feels like the world is just pouring down. But these people, I don't actually know all of their names, but I know where they're going to get on. I know where they're going to get off. I know these three particularly are very close. So the woman whose face I blocked out because she was looking towards me is a nurse at Essentia. And these two were having a very detailed conversation about checking in with their families, about some healthcare things, and they are often on the bus with me. And these are really interesting examples of third places, especially for regular public transit riders, and on a system, frankly, like the DTA, which is not nearly as crowded as, say, my trains when I lived in Philadelphia would have been. But they're really important because they actually are creating these networks. The idea of a third place is not a new one. It's certainly not mine. Ray Oldenburg was the person to begin defining it in his book. This is a more recent edition, and actually a new edition is due out any minute. So they continue to update. He's working with a collaborator now. And I think the idea of a third place, and it's usually an interior place, is important because in some of the details that you see on this slide. And all of these are taken from the pages that you see at the top here. I was going to look and see if you had it in this library collection, and then I did not quite get there, but I bet you could find the Great Good Place for this library or the public library. So they are inclusive and specifically local, so that really anyone feels like they belong there and can go there. They tend to be neighborhood based, although people from outside will come in. I have a picture of the come on in because it's the third place around which I've been doing a lot of my research around oral histories. And it is a good example of this based on the regulars who go there and how generous they have been with their stories. Centrally located, so the come on in is right on the corner, basically not on the corner, but close to what we think of as downtown West Duluth. And so it's easy to get there, well serviced, parking, buses, etc. Lots of people go there it's diverse in terms of class and interests, so that it doesn't feel like it's an exclusionary place or a place where you won't find a like-minded person. This one that says they include public characters, I'm going to use the air quotes there because that's Oldenburg's actual phrase, and that's the person who's at the bar or the person who's next to you on the Pilates machine, someone who's a regular character there. There are lots of regular public characters at the come on in who, depending on the time that I go or the day that I go, they are almost always there talking to each other. One day when I was there interviewing a couple of people, one of the regulars wasn't there. And there was a clear level of concern for this individual that all of them were pursuing. So how do we find this person? How do we make sure they're okay? And this is absolutely sort of what is hidden in there, is the idea that it's not just that you care for them, but that you are part of their non-genetic family. And that means that people who are experiencing trauma, difficulties, have a family that might be there to support them. Luckily, he was just late, but there was much texting and calling. We were gotten to the point when he was going to walk in the back door where someone was going to say, I'm going to send them out to find him. And the same thing happened on amongst my bus community once. One of the women that I had been riding with for a very long time vanished one day. And I said to the bus driver, oh, have you seen so-and-so? Oh, no, I haven't. But during my break, when I'm downtown, I'll just pop in where she works and I'll check in. And so it's this idea then of this fabric of community that ties us together across all sorts of differences. And of course, it's got to be fun. And I love the way that Oldenburg talks about this. The fun is about the people, not the stuff you do there. So you could have a really fun group of public characters that you come back for and are part of that community. And it could be anything. Obviously, you want it to be a slightly welcoming environment because that's probably why you went there in the first place. So how do we make places that foster fun in people? And obviously, the political and intellectual engagement is important. So a place where you can have an honest and open conversation and trust people and trust that you have those community gathering spaces. The Come On In is also a place of real nostalgia, and it's nostalgia that I think binds Western Duluth and Superior together in really beautiful ways, because the paintings on the wall of the Come On In record all of the industries of Western Duluth, basically from what we think of as sort of Lincoln Park all the way down to Fond du Lac. And it tells us the story of sort of why those neighborhoods came to be. When we wanted to build industry in Duluth, we needed a place where it was flat. And that's Western Duluth. We also, for worse, needed a place to dump things. And unfortunately, the river was an opportunity for that. I also like to remind people that the people who came over, the European settlers really came over from Superior first. And our first sawmills came over basically from families who had started building industry on the Superior side of the river, so that there's so much coming back and forth across that waterway and the ways that we're having our neighborhoods build up around those industries. And so when I talk to people who lived in Western Duluth when these industries were coming together, what they're so proud of is the way in which they helped to build Duluth. I think they would often go to Superior for adventure as well, which they will tell me in great detail, all the things. But it is that way in which there's a lot of pride in place. And there's also, of course, a sense of loss. Like Western Duluth had a very, very difficult time, and a lot of those people lost their industry. There was a lot of hardship. And so there's some nostalgia in that. Some disruptions to place can also deepen place attachment. One example that I've seen in my oral histories is some of the communities and people who grew up in the Irving neighborhood, which is on the basically where I-35 comes through. And what they remember most deeply is when I-35 was built, the way that they lost their homes and their neighborhoods lost their home, but that actually for many of them has made them more deeply proud to be from West Duluth. And so one of the challenges, I think, is how do we use that place attachment for good moving forward, while also not acknowledging the big T and little t trauma associated with those disruptions and those losses in the name of all sorts of things. And depending on the community, that's going to look different no matter what it is. So you have some great places in Superior. This picture is a little sad, but I took it on Sunday because it was very dark and very windy. But I think that Earthrider has done a really beautiful job of making interior third places and an outdoor shared space And they continue to do lots of formal and informal gathering things. I think there's going to be a certain degree of pressure on this area with the rebuilding of the bridge. I believe strongly in the ability of this community to navigate what's going to happen, I think, a little bit. But I think that you have lots of exciting places and spaces that are underway. And that's always a reminder. This is one of the great scholars of place and identity and attachment. And she always reminds us that everything is always under construction or is being made both globally and locally. And by way, not just of collectives, but those who pass through. So I think that we're always going to be making these places. And one of the projects that I think has been really interesting was to watch what happened on Tower Avenue. So tell me, what do you all think about the tower redesign? What do you go there very often? What happened?
Well, I'm from Duluth and I don't get to Superior that often, but when I do, I continue to be impressed. It's like, oh yeah, they've redone this and I think it's spectacular.
I think it added some charm
Yeah.
to an area that needed a little bit of, but at the same time, I'm torn. I don't want to lose all of the industry. Like there's a blend there that I hope we can maintain.
And I think that's important because you don't want to erase all that.
No.
I mean, in urban planning terms, we would say that some of the wonderful things about this redesign is the way that it has used traffic calming. So by narrowing the roadway and having traffic calming, it just means that the way that architectural landscape is put, it makes people slow down. This happens in lots of ways. Lane narrowing is the first way to do it. We've done that on Woodland. Having bump outs for crossings does that. Having central places for pedestrian ways also does that. Having trees along that, just so there's more in one's view shed. All of those almost immediately slow traffic down, and that makes it safer for the humans involved. I'm also impressed by the size of the sidewalks now and the way that they've been broken down with some planting, with some seating, and not seating that I don't care for the benches that are like staring at the traffic, that they're like nestled together in ways that you might sit down and chat with a stranger, or maybe you don't, but there's sort of purposefulness about the way that the sub pieces have broken down. I also appreciate that it hasn't transformed the basic industrial downtown that is part of it, that it's just enhanced it. And I hope that it continues to bring more people over here. And I do think also from on the Duluth side, it's really, really impressive. And I think we would like to do that over on the other side of the river a little bit more, for sure.
Well, it feels like some of the businesses are using some of that
Yes.
space more.
Right.
They're treating some of that sidewalk as now part of their real estate as well when the weather's nice.
Yeah, and I think that also changes the dynamic and makes the street a place that you can come to for lots of reasons. The writer, she's not really a planner, Jane Jacobs, talked about kind of how you make a dynamic downtown. And she talks about usage, but she also talks about a diversified age of buildings, that it doesn't make sense to just like tear everything down and build everything new. That's a problem because it loses character and it loses the scale. Think about Sesame Street. That's what she wants us to all have. But also then everything decays at the same rate. And so then like over the lifetime of a building, you find yourself in the same place of having to be like, what are we doing? So you want to have those ages mixed together. And I think it also honors our histories a lot as well. And then thinking about scale and the way that our first floors of our mixed use buildings, mixed use being you might have offices or living on the top, is how the interiors extend to the exteriors, both with furnishings, but what do we have in front of the glass windows? Are you looking in and out? Are there people watching those? All of those create safer places. It's why when I'm going to Lincoln Park, I'm really struck by the building at the far end that has parking on the ground floor. And so you don't have anything on that ground floor, which is so critical for the habitat that is both an inside and outside habitat. It's why Dovetail's awesome, because those windows have people in them all the time. And I also think it's one of the reasons that the western end of downtown Duluth is a problem, because we don't have a lot in the bottoms of those buildings. So these are actually really interesting things that I hope you'll observe when you're wandering around and thinking about how we make these vibrant downtowns and how those third spaces can penetrate inside and outside. And oh yes.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I also think a very poor example of place is the whole central entrance in Duluth. I mean, it's dreadful. It's a primary entry into the city, and it doesn't have the scale that you're talking about, and certainly no windows, and the traffic's too fast. And I know that I think they're going to do some work on that in the future, and I sure hope they put some thought into that.
Now, I don't know what when the central entrance redesign is. I know that they're going to start the 6th Avenue lane conversion very soon. And that the feedback from that will be the first step towards whether or not we do a much larger transformation of that corridor. So right now, 6th Avenue is 2 lanes up and 2 lanes down. Traffic studies really have shown us consistently that 1 lane in either direction with a dedicated turn lane is safer for lots and lots of reasons, but it is counterintuitive when you think about moving traffic more efficiently, but in smaller spaces. The 6th Avenue, I think, will be the most visible one that we've seen, and Zeitgeist has done the most incredible work to make sure that the community has a voice, because one of the things that's the problem with 6th Avenue is it slices the hillside in half, and it's not safe for families to walk their kiddos from the west side to the east side because of the crossings. And even on those, the more people who are walking between those, then you have community. Everyone's going to walk their kids at the same time. Maybe you're going to hang out a little bit. These are also sort of informal third places and community places that are important. I know that my time is coming to an end. Just say that I am really interested to continue making places on either side of the river. When I moved to Duluth, I had not been in Minnesota ever. I had not also been in Wisconsin. And one of the things that I think is exciting about having the Twin Ports is how closely we work together and our ideation is shared across the river. And so I look forward to continuing our histories. Obviously Superior and Duluth are always trying to figure out which one's the communication one. I was reading about the platting and the establishment of Superior, and everyone had to go through the territory of Minnesota because that's where the mail roads were. But like, how are we going to get people to Superior? And then the rail line went to Duluth instead of Superior, and that set us a little ahead. And now it reminds me of the Northern Lights. Is it going to go into Superior and come to Duluth? It's all really about transportation. And obviously, when we were establishing these communities and beginning industry, what we thought is we were going to outpace Chicago and St. Paul in terms of intersections east and west. As soon as the Sulaks opened, we thought, okay, well, we're the most western point. There are extraordinary dreams of what the Twin Ports would be with the 1 million people living here. Obviously, a million people don't. And actually, I'm very relieved about that. But it does tell us that it's always about transportation in these histories and how we are getting places to places and through places, but also along the way how we make places that people want to stay and be. And so thank you so much for having me. Oh, I thought I'd put a picture of the bridge. Let's see where this takes us. So where are we going to be? You're all going to be coming across to my neighborhood across the Vaughan Bridge. Maybe we're going to have many more gatherings on that side of the road. And I do think this image is so gorgeous because, again, it reminds us of how connected we are in this area of the Twin Ports. So all of us, all of you, are capable of doing wonderful things, making places, building third spaces, and I can't wait to do that with all of you. So thanks for having me today. Questions that you have for me?
I do. So actually, Superior is in the middle of doing like an new zoning code for the city, and I'm curious if you have any advice, just thoughts for like, how to encourage maybe more of these third places. They're trying to simplify, do some form code, more simplification, definitely looking to do more mixed developments, but I'm just curious if you have thoughts on like that process, which is, I know, quite large, but
I would say I am not an expert on zoning or reimagining, but I do, we talk about in my urban planning class that zoning had a great purpose post-industrial revolution, where we wanted to make sure we were not living next to the factory that was going to cause our lives, but that we have outlived that. But the problem is that it's become so institutionalized. So I also often talk about the work that Doug Farr and his architectural firm out of Chicago do, because they spend so much time figuring out how to advocate for zoning changes, or to think about how, yes, this is in the highway law, these are the guides, but what if this isn't what we need? And when he came a long time ago to Duluth to talk, he said, the most important and least sexy work that we're doing in urban planning is policy stuff. It has to be done so that we can make space for the kinds of communities we want to build. It's certainly challenging. I see that they're gonna vote on some zoning things in Duluth. And I think we're continuing, even the reimagining of the zoning in Spirit Valley will allow for some of the continued, I mean, Grand Avenue has kind of a highway setback feel to it. And then but we also have some mixed use and more dense housing development there as the new housing goes in. So that doesn't really answer the question, because I'm not an expert on that process. I'm certainly not an expert here. I'm just gonna acknowledge that. But I think that this is the kind of work that the community, when people are asking for it, go and give feedback. Like, what do you want on your streets?
I've spent a career in aging and adult services. And so we're not to use the term silver tsunami, or, that's not what we're doing. But in this, in your field, are there conversations happening about, those of us reaching a certain age, we'd really prefer not to drive at night, and I always make, right-hand turn.
Yeah, right.
It's like,
That's what the lane conversions are much better for that.
well, and there's more of us coming, there's more of us coming, so, yeah.
So new urbanist principles and the idea of the 15-minute city. Have you all heard about the 15-minute city? So this is the idea that, and really we should think about it as neighborhoods, that within one's neighborhood, you should be able to, on a mobility situation, go 15 minutes and have basically everything that you need. When you add in transit, that might mean that I'm not able necessarily to walk to work in 15 minutes, but I could walk to my bus stop in 15 minutes. Initially, the thought was 5 minutes. That scale wise and resource wise is not practical. But the reason for that is that urban planners said, imagine where a kiddo eating an ice cream can go in 5 minutes, and design for the little ones and the people who are aging, because they have kind of the same radius, and we want to think about where people can get in that range. I think that's really important. And it also is thinking about, yes, we want to be able to have a quality of life that doesn't require us to actually have to drive if we don't want to. Where can we walk? That might promote a healthy lifestyle. We may find community where we wouldn't if we were living in our single family home in a suburb. It does require in-building and infill, I think. And what's pretty interesting about the neighborhoods in Duluth and also in Superior is that we already have neighborhoods with pretty clear identities, and some of them already have sort of little downtowns that could be built in. I know my neighbors in the Denfeld neighborhood would like to retire in place in the Denfeld neighborhood, and we don't have as much housing stock for that. The wait list, I think last I heard for the tower there, my neighbor said was 5 years, and he would really like to be able to move out of the house sooner than that. And again, it's sort of the scope of those projects. I do also love to talk to my students about all of the little ways in which designing for all humans is important. So we did a walk around campus today on our last day of class, and I was like, did you notice this? Or did you notice this? You know, what about accessibility? These are important questions. There is a group out in Colorado who are designing parks with children. So thinking about what does a 3-year-old want in a park, and then transforming that. So thinking about who are the voices who are commonly here, but also who else are we designing for? And I think that is increasingly important. The 15-minute city is more like a European downtown, which sort of prioritizes walking or at least mobility. I also think culturally, when I'm in Italy, I was thinking about this actually when I was there in the fall, there's also, it doesn't feel like there's as much weight on people who are using walkers or people who are have assisted pieces, because everybody's moving around. And so there are lots more examples of that. And I think so there's that cultural shift as well that I think is important.
I try and remind myself, don't be a baby boomer about this. You know, I think one of the exciting things now is that, you know, when you think about the baby boom generation, 46 to 64, drove so much asset building, schools and daycares, and now this wave, I think is going to drive a lot of asset building to support the mature. Oh, I'm using all the words I studied. I'm so glad I'm retired, you know. What an exciting, you know, it's an exciting time.
And I think the conversations, the transit-oriented design is probably the way that one thinks about neighborhoods within larger communities. So, and often once one begins to sort of, let's say, put a transit center in and then have some housing there, that's often a catalyst for shops, and that can expand. Again, it's that scope of time that is patient. But again, I think my parents, like you, would really like to be able to live in a space where they could get on a bus really, really easily.
I practice giving my kids my keys to my grandson.
Yes.
I practice. Okay, grandma's not gonna drive anymore, so here, you have my keys. So it doesn't go real well.
And also it's a privilege to live in a community where one can have that conversation, because there's so many places where we couldn't even begin to have a conversation about that. And I think that's a challenge too.
You know, this is like kind of like a very big topic, but I live over in Duluth too, really close to 6th Avenue East actually, so I'm very grateful that this is starting. But what do you think needs to happen specifically in downtown Duluth to start seeing things like the changes? Like, I've been really heartened. I grew up in Duluth and I moved back in 2012. And I was so happy to see things like the Tower Avenue changes, the Lincoln Park changes, the smaller neighborhoods that had grown up. I was hoping a bigger one would be happening around UMD. It's maybe getting there, but something like that has to happen downtown. What do you kind of think are the main things that have to happen for that, you know, for downtown to become that place?
That's an excellent question. I have lots of thoughts.
Yeah.
I think that downtown, there are some challenges there in terms of a desire for a reimagining of the streetscape and a concern about parking. One of the fundamental challenges, I mean, I think there are a few flashpoints in urban planning very generally. One is bike lanes. One can start a fight with anybody by mentioning bike lanes in any community, no matter what. And two is parking. And so many people talk about the idea that we treat parking as like a right, that we need to just drive down there and there's going to be one right there in front of the place that we're going to go. But then we don't pay for that really in any of our infrastructure ways. And so people worry that then it's going to diminish their business, and those voices can have a great deal of weight. The rents are very high down there, and I think that is a challenge. We have more than enough parking in downtown Duluth. It's just in structures, and it's just a little bit further away.
Yeah, we have a big problem with that in Duluth, yeah. We don't like parking in ramps.
No, it's true. We do not. I'm interested to see what happens as the Ordine building renovation happens and the housing actually moves in there, because that will anchor at the west end of many more residents. I feel like the Northern Lights are probably not going to happen now. But if it were still going to, and we were going to bring tourists by train into the depot, that would be a very interesting catalyst, because you would pop out of the front of the depot, which is absolutely glorious, and there's almost nothing there unless you want to go to the public library. So immediately some entrepreneur is going to be like, you know what those people need? A bathroom, which they're probably going to find at the depot, but they're probably going to want a cup of coffee. How am I going to immediately capture, this is where you should go from here? Maybe there's going to be a bike or scooter rental place. Those are the things that immediately have that catalytic impact. And then I don't know what's going to happen with the public library. I strongly believe it should stay in downtown, because it is absolutely a third place for so many people, and it provides so much support for the humans who are down there all the time. But I think it could be, if we win the urban planning lottery and have billions of dollars, it could be reimagined to a library that also had things inside of it. There was one in a small town in Iowa that had a roof terrace, which would be magnificent there, a library, all of the social services, and that too has some possibilities. So how could we reimagine those pieces? I do think that the fundamental challenge downtown is.
So how does the fact that we're working with a fairly stagnant population and kind of a stagnant resource base impact all of this work?
So the tax base, of course, like the new housing that they're building, the hope is that then it funds further housing. I do not financially know anywhere enough to really understand how that might play out. But for example, the Incline Village work that they're doing on Old Central Heights, they've started with higher end housing in spite of what we need in town, because that will fund other things. I do think also, of course, with the federal changes, I think we have greater scarcity going forward for the kind of initiatives we might want to do. I think the work on the reimagining I-35, there was some potential there. I don't know where it has gone as the new political climate has changed. I do believe that the leadership in both of our communities is still very committed to the work that we're doing. And for that, I think we're fortunate. I tell my students the very best thing they can do is to vote. Because, and I say, as a college student, I only voted the presidential election. I didn't know enough to vote, but obviously that makes a huge difference for sure in our neighborhoods.
Can you clarify something? You said the main problem downtown is parking.
Yeah.
But you mean the people's perception of
Yes.
parking,
Yeah.
right? Okay.
Yes. No, I definitely mean that.
Yeah, because there's
Yes.
enough.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
We just don't use it. Okay.
And I think so many economic studies have been done demonstrating that cars don't buy things, people buy things, obviously. And so if you have more walkability and better scale and more things to do, people will shop more. And I think the contrast between Lincoln Park and downtown has been pretty striking about that. And in fact, at one of the public meetings I went to for the ongoing conversation about improving downtown, someone said, well, what if they can't park in front of my shop? And I said, well, people are walking blocks in Lincoln Park to get ice cream. I think we already know in our community that people are doing that. I think it's just, it's people, business people have a reason. We want to make sure we're supporting our business people, but it can be very challenging to figure out how to navigate those conversations. You can deflect to a bike lane.
One question about augmented reality games and place literacies. Have you seen, or what relationships could we draw between those games that encourage almost fourth places, right? Because they're taking place in a digital world in a real place. What kinds of comments can we make about those?
That is a fantastic question. Do you have an answer that you could give me about your own experiences?
I'm just reflecting on playing Pokemon Go and, you know, a certain gym might have a person that I know or by their handle, of course, not by their real name. And if they do not get in that gym, I also think, oh my goodness, where is this person? It's a very similar and yet very different experience from the bus, for example.
Yeah,
Yeah.
one of the things that I see with my students is indeed those communities are really important to them, the ones that are living, that are in their virtual spaces. And what's also striking with my students is they also talk about the way that navigating those virtual landscapes makes them think about their own landscapes and their own places. And so I think there's a really interesting overlap there. I am hoping to use augmented reality in my architecture class that I'm teaching in the fall so that we can go to places and to think about how those technologies allow us to connect outside of our communities like this in lots of different ways. And so I think it's still something I need much more to think about more deeply. And I'm not a gamer, 100% not a gamer. I do love there used to be a Pokemon Go thing in the park in front of my house. And so people would behave in a very interesting way when I knew what they were doing. There'd be a lot of like walking around. And it's wonderful because then you would absolutely have a conversation because they'd be like, do you know where this is? I'd be like, well, you're close based on all the other people who wander around in this park in this very particular way. And I think that's also these opportunities that for any reason for us to begin together, to be together and have conversations for sure. I don't know if it's still there because I haven't seen people lurking recently.
Find a geocache.
Oh, yes.
Do you get different lurking?
Yes, different lurking. That's also really fun.
Well, I want to thank everybody for attending. We can absolutely still ask questions, but I'd like to conclude the YouTube broadcast. So thank you, Dr. Jennifer Webb.
Thank you so much.
Wonderful.
Thank you.